People always called my father quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. At birthday dinners, family gatherings, long drives home after dark, he'd sit there smiling while everyone else filled the room. And I never understood it back then. Silence felt like distance to me. My father said, "I love you," without ever saying the words. In every ride home, every patient smile, every story he let me tell. And now I see he was never hard to read. I was just too young to know the language. Some people speak through words, some people listen instead. I talked about everything, school days and future plans, friends whose names I've forgotten now, dreams that changed again and again. You rarely talked about yourself, maybe a question, maybe a nod, then somehow you'd let me keep talking for miles. For years I thought people who loved each other should always have something to say. My father said, "I love you," without ever saying the words. Through long evenings, dinner tables, and ordinary moments I miss, he gave me his attention long before I knew how rare that really is. Some gifts look ordinary until enough years pass. Evening years later, we sat across from each other, the television humming softly. Dinner already finished, we talked for a while then stopped, and the silence stayed. The younger me would rush to fill it, reached for another story, another question, anything at all. But this time I didn't, and for the first time the silence felt peaceful, like home. My father said, "I love you," without ever saying the words. By showing up year after year and making space for every part of my life. And the older I get, the more I understand how difficult it is to truly listen. Maybe people were right, maybe he was a quiet man, but now I think something different. He spent most of his life saying, "I love you," in a language I was simply too young to understand. I used to hear silence, now I hear my father saying everything that mattered. No, 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 no. My mother always had a book somewhere, folded open halfway through, a recipe clipped from a magazine she swore she'd get around to soon. Knitting baskets in the corner, television shows she'd never reach the end. Every few months a brand new hobby, and somehow we'd never hear about it again. I used to laugh and tell her, "You never finish anything," and she'd just smile like it didn't bother her at all. I thought my mother left things unfinished, pages unread, dreams on hold. But every time life asked her to choose, she chose us. And now I see those weren't unfinished stories, they were sacrifices. I was too young to read. Some kinds of love look ordinary from the inside. Years later I came back home, helping clean an old closet shelf, and found a box I'd never noticed, filled with pieces of someone else. Half-finished paintings, story ideas, travel brochures worn at the seams, a guide to learning Italian, sketches, abandoned dream. For the first time I started noticing dates, and suddenly everything changed. I thought my mother left things unfinished because she lost interest somehow. But every book, every painting, every plan that slowly faded out had been interrupted by school events, doctor visits, late night fears, a child needing comfort, a child needing help, again and again and again. Every unfinished thing had been competing with us, and every time we won. There turning pages, meeting versions of my mother I'd never known before. The writer, the traveler, the artist, the woman learning a new language, the woman with dreams that needed time. And for the first time I wondered how many times she paused her own life so ours could keep moving. I thought my mother left things unfinished, now I know the truth. Those books stayed half-read, those paintings stayed half-done, those dreams waited quietly in boxes gathering dust. Because while all those things were waiting, she was building something else. Something bigger than herself, and somehow we never noticed that we were the thing she chose to finish. The paintings never found their ending, the stories never reached the last page. But every time someone asks who I became, I hear my mother's unfinished dreams still living in me anyway. I found an old photograph hidden in a box one weekend. You standing by an old car, me sitting high upon your shoulders, both of us smiling at something outside the frame. outside the years. I've seen that picture all my life, but somehow I saw it differently this time. The day I became your age, everything changed. The giant from my childhood started looking like a man. And for the first time, I wasn't looking at my father, I was looking at someone trying to figure life out too. Growing older didn't explain the world, it explained you. When you're young, parents seem permanent, like certainty arrives. The moment someone becomes an adult, you knew how to drive, pay bills, fix broken things, and somehow that felt like proof you had all the answers. Then adulthood arrived, and I discovered something else. The day I became your age, I finally understood. Most of us are improvising more than we ever admit to, making choices without guarantees, carrying worries quietly, pretending we're certain when we're not. Maybe confidence and fear have always lived together. I kept staring at that photograph, trying to hold two versions of you at the same time. The giant from my childhood and the young man in that picture. A man raising a child while still becoming himself. A man with questions he probably never answered. Dreams he hadn't fully let go of, and responsibilities waiting every morning at the door. Yet somehow you still showed up every single day. The day I became your age, I stopped seeing you as someone who had all the answers, and started seeing you as someone who loved me while searching for them too. And maybe that's what growing older does. One day you stop looking up at your parents and start standing beside them, close enough to finally understand the weight they carried, the fears they hid, the love they gave. Anyway, I used to see my father, now I see the man, and somehow I admire him even more. For most of my life, I thought I knew my parents, their favorite foods, their daily routines, the stories they told every holiday, the things that made them laugh, the things that made them tired. And somehow I thought that was enough. When you're young, parents feel permanent, like they arrived already knowing who they were. I knew the mother, I knew the father, but I never asked about they're simply waiting. One evening I found a photograph taken years before I was born. My father standing by a motorcycle, smiling at a life I'd never known. Not the man who drove me to school, not the man who paid the bills, just a young man with plans and fears and time that belonged to him. For the first time, I wasn't looking at my father, I was looking at a stranger. I knew the mother, I knew the father, but I never asked about the people before. The music they loved, the dreams they followed, the versions of themselves that existed before my name did. And suddenly I realized there were entire chapters I'd never opened. Not because they were secrets, because nobody asked. So I started asking different things. What was your first job? What did you want to become? Who were your closest friends? What songs were always playing then? And with every answer, the picture became larger. Stories I never knew existed, waiting quietly for decades, like books left unopened on a shelf. I knew the mother, I knew the father, but I barely knew the people before. The young woman learning who she was, the young man chasing something ahead, the dreams that changed, the names they forgot, the years that slowly disappeared. And now whenever I go home, I ask about places, I ask about people, I ask about the lives that came before mine. Because one day I realized some of the most important stories were never hidden from me at all. I simply never thought to ask. And sometimes the saddest question isn't the one left unanswered, it's the one you never asked in time. Every time I came back home, everything felt familiar somehow. The hallway looked the same, the kitchen smelled the same, the stairs still creaked in all the places they always did. And I like believing some things never changed. Maybe everyone needs one place that feels untouched by time. My old room still knew my name, even after all these years. Old notebooks on forgotten shelves, memories waiting quietly there. And I thought these walls were holding on. That's what I believed for so long, till I realized someone else had been keeping them all along. Some kinds of love look like saving small things. One winter afternoon, looking for an old charger, I opened a closet I hadn't touched in years. Childhood drawings, school notebooks, a broken toy, missing pieces, a jacket from another life still hanging there. Everything carefully saved, like nobody wanted the story to end. My old room still knew my name, though I'd been gone so long. Every photograph, every forgotten thing somehow still belonged. And all those years I thought the house was waiting, when really it was two people quietly leaving the light on. Familiar things can hide the truth for years. That night I walked through the house, a little slower than before. The kitchen, the hallway, the room at the end of the stairs. The paint had changed, the roof had been repaired. Time had touched everything except the pieces they kept for me. Because rooms remember, not because houses wait, not because time stood still. It was love, patient enough to save a drawing, patient enough to keep a jacket, patient enough to leave space for the child who moved away. And now I understand, every little thing they kept was their way of saying, belong here. My old room wasn't waiting for me. They were, and somehow they always will be.